Well, good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to the Oman Energy Forum virtual workshop. I do hope that everybody on this session has been able to join us earlier today for the breakfast seminars, briefings, and also the plenary session that just took place, which gave us a very good introduction to the whole question of finding sustainable solutions for Oman to achieve water, food, energy security. This session, which is one of 4 roundtables, will be focusing on sort of a subsection of that question. And the purpose of the next sort of 40 minutes or so is for us to hopefully reach some recommendations on how to foster sort of deeper collaboration between these 3 sectors of food, water, and energy, with the ultimate objective, obviously, that if you do have deeper collaboration, then we can achieve those Nexus targets and spur innovation. So essentially, what is it going to take to get these sectors to collaborate more and drop what many criticize is still predominantly silo thinking between these sectors, not just in Oman, but across different countries and regions. And I'm delighted to have, we are delighted to have a panel, 5 panelists with us and speakers, guest speakers this morning. And I look forward to hearing from them all. And we will hopefully also have some time for some questions from our audience. And the way we're going to go about that today is through the chat feature, which hopefully you should all have on your Teams there. And you can send questions as the presentations and points made go along, and we'll try and get to as many of those as we can. But without further ado, I'd like us to start the session, and it's my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Dr. Saif Al-Haddabi, Undersecretary of the Ministry of Higher Education for Research and Innovation in Oman. Dr. Saif, welcome, please, and we look forward to your introductory comments.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Diala, for this chance actually to be part of this excellent event. I'm really happy to be part of this because we are now, as we used to be called the Research Council, now we are actually part of the Ministry of Higher Education, Research and Innovation. And we are really responsible for setting up policies, strategies, and regulatory framework to promote research and innovation at the national level, and to set up the national ecosystem for innovation and research, of course, across all priorities, including the water, food, energy nexus, which we are really focusing heavily on it from our side.
Sorry, I'm getting. Thank you. I'm getting interference. If we could just make sure that if you're not speaking, if everyone could be on mute, please, if they could mute themselves. Dr. Bahry, thank you. Dr. Saif, thank you very much. Can you hear me now? I'm just checking that we have our audio. Perfect.
Yes, I hear you very well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'd like to also introduce Professor Saeed Nasser Al-Bahry, Director of Oil and Gas Research Center at Sultan Qaboos University. Welcome, Professor Al-Bahry, and your introductory thoughts, please, on the question of, again, and I'd like to really try and focus our discussions as much as possible. There's so many questions around this nexus, but we're here to answer the question of how can we deepen the collaboration across these sectors.
Excellent. Thank you, Dalia. Thank you for this. Anyway, my name is Saif, not Saeed. So I'm like His Excellency Saif also. So you have 2 Saifs here. Yes. But according to our symbol of Oman, we are missing Khanjar now. We have the 2 Saifs here.
Yes, anyway, absolutely.
Yeah, this is well. Thank you first very much for this kind of invitation. And a very good group, actually, that we are meeting, everyone with his or her own experience, including Dr. Syham, for example, here. We have done this many times, so this is another one, which is an excellent. Out of these, actually, as I representing the academia here, as well as the research center, this is an excellent opportunity that we have to look at also backwards. What we have achieved so far, there is a lot of achievement since we started the GI in intelligence. But we need to discuss more about this in terms of these 5 points that has been raised in our session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Saif. Professor Paul Stevens, Distinguished Fellow for Energy, Environment and Resources Program at Chatham House. How are you, Professor? It's good to see you again. It's been a while. I hope you're keeping well.
Good morning to everybody, or should I say good evening, because it feels like the middle of the night here in London.
The darkness.
Yes. I've got a couple of minutes to make a few comments, which hopefully will start some sort of a discussion. My main theme is going to be revolved around the urgency of taking action on these issues. Now, to this audience, I don't need to explain why the food, energy, water nexus is important. The 3 sectors are closely linked as both are mutual inputs and indeed outputs. An obvious example where I have been involved in Oman relates to desalination and energy. In the year 2000, I was involved with MEDREC, the Middle East Desalination Research Centre, based in Muscat, making the case why they should be able to do in-house research rather than simply funding other people's research. My theme is one of urgency. The world is currently undergoing an energy transition away from hydrocarbon molecules to electrons from renewables. For that, you can read low carbon and low methane sources of electricity. Now, in my view, what I call the energy establishments, the IEA, OPEC, and the large international oil companies, until recently at least, have been seriously underestimating the speed and depth of this transition. Several reasons explain this reluctance to accept the speed. There's vested interests. There's a degree of intellectual inertia as well. If you've been singing the same song for a long time, it's difficult to change the lyrics. If you look at the history of energy transitions, and there's a lot of literature on this, and it's well worth looking at if you're not familiar with it, some transitions have taken a long time, and this is the current argument of the energy establishment. They're saying, oh, don't worry, it's going to be a slow process. Energy transitions take time. Well, some have. My favorite is the USA from 1865 to 1900, when they moved from wood to coal, and that took around 35 years. But if you look more recently, especially when governments have been involved, the French transition to nuclear took 12 years, and in the UK, the transition from gas to renewables in power took 6 years. Now, there's many implications of this, but the one that concerns me most is the negative impact on poverty for fossil fuel producers as a move away from buying fossil fuels. And this is going to be much greater and much sooner than many expect. Now, how do you speed up a mitigating response to this? Well, simple. You need an active and dynamic private sector to help the economy diversify away from oil and gas. And the best way to help the private sector is to strengthen property rights and the rule of law. But governments also have a key role in this and need to think how to promote a just transition. And I think there's going to be increasing emphasis on this concept of a just transition, because while it's clear that climate change presents us with an existential threat, so too does poverty. Now, very briefly, if you go back to Economics 101 discussion of social cost-benefit analysis, it says a project is a good project if the winners, in theory, can compensate the losers. But that's in theory. There's no requirement to do so. However, I would argue that in a just transition, they must compensate the losers. Otherwise, it will be extremely bad news for poverty. And at that point, I'll stop. Sorry, I went on more than my 2 minutes.
It's okay. Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Professor Stevens. Dr. Syham Bentouati, welcome, Managing Director of NAFAS International. And I think I'll just pick on a couple of, and I would let you have your say, obviously, but to go to you with a couple of the points that have been raised so far, and to get us into the discussion of fostering this deeper collaboration between the three sectors. But your organization is a consultancy that deals with technology, innovation, solutions, obviously, to which focus on this water and energy sustainability. Let me put it to you, and from the private sector point of view as well. Do you think there is enough cooperation, let's start with that point, between the private and public sectors? Oh, we can't hear you, Dr. Syham. You have to unmute yourself. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry about that. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to this roundtable. And thank you for the question, Diala. So yeah, from my point of view, from the private sector, actually, the question you asked is around the points I was going to start with. So that's a good one.
Please proceed.
I think actually, is there collaboration? Yes. But what kind of collaboration is really what matters here? I think what we need to look at is make up these collaborations, because we can have collaborations, but for me, if you want to have a successful one, it has we have to see out of it impactful results. And impactful would be bold, underlined, and italic, because if we don't see good results out of it, it's not going to be sustainable. And one way to make sure that this is impactful is what role is the private sector actually having, and what are the members of a collaboration. So if you look at, if you do a search, for example, on the internet now, you will find many examples of very good initiatives, papers, and even pilots of, for example, solar desalination or any other WEF-related, WEF Nexus-related project. But what you don't find, or you find a lot less, is successfully deployed, impactful projects. And that's because of how we make these collaborative groups. Either people work without collaboration, or in the collaboration, we don't have somebody who is there to make sure that after the research, for example, somebody has committed to deploy it and to deploy it properly. And I think so it's really about the content of the collaboration rather than just collaborating. If you have only academics, for example, then you end up with beautiful, great papers, but it's not going to happen in the ground. If you have only industry, also it will be missing. So it's about having what the Dutch government calls the triple helix, but everyone has to have a useful role. And I think actually commitment within the collaboration for deployment is key. No deployment means it's just, as I said, nice project, but they don't really make an impact on anybody's life.
Thank you, Dr. Syham. Well, I mean, in the previous session, we had a national Nexus panel in the plenary session, which, a representative from each of the water, food and energy sectors talking about, what needs to be done. And there was some opinion put forward on that. And so many solutions that are already out there, desalinating water for food, purifying water from oil wells and using that, etc. Grasslands management. I mean, I have a whole list here of the solutions have already been identified as to what we can do by being more efficient with all these resources and helping them interact. Let me go to Fadi Subaiti, who is from Aerofarms, who are a very innovative company which is pioneering, in certain cases, vertical farming. Fadi, welcome. And just on that point,
excuse me for the interruption. My CEO is present in person, and he is David Rosenberg, and he's ready to take your question. So
is
sorry
that
for
David then on the screen?
Yes, that's David on the screen.
Okay, sorry, David, because I was told that Fadi was replacing, and we haven't met before. So we have David back. Yeah. Okay, David then, David Rosenberg from the CEO of Aerofarms. Welcome, David. Thank you for clarifying that. So, David, I mean, on the sort of that question of implementation, if you like, and let's look at the sort of technology angle of which obviously you have put into effect in some of the solutions you've done on vertical farming, I'm sure. Do you believe the technologies today that we need to find these efficiencies between the three sectors? Or is that the problem? Do we not have cost-effective technology yet? And perhaps that's why we're not seeing this integration.
Yeah, first, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm actually going to be in Oman tomorrow, so looking forward to being in country, if you will. I'm an optimist, so I'm an entrepreneur, an innovator, but the problem is an holistic problem, meaning we need the solutions from the technology side, from the human behavioral side, from the policy side. And we need to move fast, and they're all somewhat intertwined. And I'll give a couple examples. So technology. So we're a vertical farming company. For those who don't know, we grow plants in warehouses as opposed to greenhouses, level upon level of growing. Plants don't need sun, they need spectrum light, they don't need soil, they need nutrients and micronutrients. So there's high productivity in a small footprint. So back to your question. So that's just for context because I'm going to illustrate with some examples. So we develop systems to grow a plant using as much as 95% less water. Just how do you use filtration to take off nutrients and micronutrients? How do you take what plants transpire and dehumidify, put it in closed loop systems? There's an expense to doing that. And if the free markets, and I'll use US examples, so bear with me. So in the US, often there's policies that say use it or lose it. Meaning if you don't, whatever water a farmer doesn't use, if they don't get that allocation the following year. So that takes away incentives to be good stewards of water. Additionally, in some areas, some farmers are sold per square meter, square acre, whatever you have it, instead of by usage. Again, taking off the incentives to be good stewards. And another example is prices are artificially low to help the farmer. Again, taking off incentives. So where those incentives are pushed into commerce, then the innovator is incentivized to solve problems. If you take away those incentives, and often policy screws it up because they want to, like, let's say there's a good intention of let's have water free, and that's intentionally good, but there's a real cost to water and there's a finite amount of water. And if you take away the right incentives, commerce, meaning business, can't solve it. The innovator who figures out how to innovate, their solutions doesn't have market viability. So in our example of using 95% less water, there's very little economic impact in doing so in the US. Maybe in Oman or in some regions, there's high economic impact. And that's why from a business plan standpoint, an innovator tries to go, the entrepreneur tries to go to places where they'll have early success. So we look at places as an example of where there's high pain points or high political will, high will. So here in the Middle East, for example, where we're having a regional focus, there's high pain, meaning not a lot of farmland, not a lot of fresh water, there's relatively inexpensive energy, and there's political will of like being leaders, there's more economic resources where you could be a leader and take leadership for the rest of the world of what is that technology that could really pull. And the technology is moving. I'll give an example, again, with my Aerofarms hat on. LEDs, a light emitting diode. Just think of how much lights LEDs are used in your homes today versus 5 years ago. Tremendously more. And that cost curve, there's something called Heitz's law, analogous to Moore's law, that talks about the cost and the efficiency of a diode improving by 50% every 3 years. If you take that, it shows that there's going to be more and more economic relevancy for indoor vertical farm plants versus 5 years ago, and even more varieties that make economic sense 5 years from now. Technology is moving at warp speed. AI, just understanding of all the different influencers of a plant are moving at warp speed. But if you take our industry and vertical farming and taking it to others, think of solar. Solar 20 years ago, it didn't start, and it was very small. Then you had early adopters in Germany, the US, then you had economies of scale manufacturing in China. Now all of a sudden you have economics in solar that makes sense for sub-Saharan Africa. So you need leadership where there's typically high pain, high political will as the beachheads to be that guiding light for the rest of the world. The last point is behavioral change. So behavioral change is very fundamental to all of this. And what's exciting, there's like saying, don't let a good catastrophe go to waste. So here, COVID, there's a silver lining in COVID. And the consumers are more focused on the how, not just the what. meaning not just what is this product, but how is it grown? So there's more awareness of the social side and the impact on the environmental side. And this is an opportunity for policymakers to push the right pieces, for good actors in business to be rewarded for being good actors, and hopefully bad actors for being penalized for being bad actors, whether it's carbon, whether it's pollution, whatever it is. There are ways to better incentivize commerce to do the right thing and start to, if not price in the externalities by commerce, have the consumers start to ask the right questions and decide with their pocketbook.
Thank you very much, David, for that. Dr. Al-Haddabi, from a ministerial level, David mentioned it, and this is an argument often made that, it has to be top down in the sense that if you want these sectors to communicate, I mean, from the ministerial level in Oman, are we seeing enough direction from the ministries of energy or other ministries in terms of their role in linking these sectors together, whether it's linking the public with the private or even linking the three water, food, energy, public sectors together, communicating with them enough to try and identify integrated strategies and the solutions that we've mentioned there, whether it's on the food front, using water for food, etc., or whether it's conserving energy. What more can be done, Dr. Haddabi, to bring that communication closer?
Thank you, Diala. I think that partnership should be built on two main criteria, on principles, and that should involve all stakeholders, and also it should be based on a win-win situation, and also it should bring supply and demand on the table from all components, and having clear objectives. And also it should have the appropriate tools for collaboration and partnership. And these tools could be actually physical platforms, or they could be also digital platforms. From our experience in the Research Council, we have established several of these platforms. For example, we have the Innovation Park Muscat, which is a science and technology park located in a strategic location near Sultan Qaboos University, Knowledge Oasis Muscat, Rusail Industrial Zone, and other important infrastructure such as Muscat International Airport. The park, of course, spans over 540,000 square meters, and it is a free zone dedicated for research, innovation, that brings government, academia, and industry together, including, of course, society. And interestingly, the park is really focusing on 4 areas. 3 of them are energy, food, and water, which are really forming the nexus that we are talking about. And the 4th one basically is health. All the 4 areas are based on the 4th Industrial Revolution technology as an enabler. But also we have other physical components that are actually bringing the players together. We have Oman Animal and Plant Genetic Resources Center, which is really focusing on food and trying to create a sustainable exploitation and valuation of the genetic diversity in Oman, and mainly focus on animal, plants, marine, and microorganisms. We also have created along the water direction a national chair of nanotechnology for water desalination at Sultan Qaboos University. And we have funded that chair for 5 years, nearly with close to about $5 million US. And now actually it's a fully independent center after graduating from the development as a chair at the Sultan Qaboos University. The other...
Dr. Haddabi,
yes.
Let me just stop you there, if I may, and go to Professor Saif Al-Bahry. On that, all these incredible initiatives by the government for research, R&D. Professor Al-Bahry, in terms of, you've got those research centers and those new development zones, I suppose, in Oman, but are we seeing enough, again, talking between and coordination between academia and industry? All these wonderful R&D centers are being funded, and we'll talk about funding as well later on. Are we seeing enough of the industry side getting involved with that, whether it's, with incubation startups, or just more coordination on really what's needed, what's been done, and where should our funds be going to? If you unmute yourself, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you again for this very interesting question. Anyway, and I think that is one of my points that I wanted to raise. So much efforts have been done in Oman, as His Excellency Al-Haddabi said, and but we need to see more. And as Professor Stevens also has mentioned, that he has worked in desalination. I was working also in desalination, but now we can see more. Our challenge in Oman is actually, if I put it, there are three already mentioned, or four have been mentioned by His Excellency Dr. Saif, but also we shouldn't forget the environment. Environment is a serious issue. Actually, the produced water in oil fields is an environmental impact, has not been discussed about this issue, and it's marginal is considered, but I think it should be one of the core things. Why? If we look at the issue of water, it's actually the two sources are coming there that we have about 1 billion cubic meters per day is sewage related water, and of course it's this produced water. Oman actually, as Dr. Stevens has worked in desalination, which I was worked before him also in that area, has done a great job actually to make these desalination plants everywhere and so on. Now we're facing this, the issue of produced water. In our as research center, we have done that. We have done a lot of these environmental studies related to what I call it now petroleum engineer. Biotechnology. This is actually working because we have discovered so many things and there that could be treated. In addition, that also it has mentioned that there is a nanotechnology center, and there is a new technology there has been found because the salinity of water from produced oil fields, some of it is very high salinity. We have done these studies to find out how challenging it is, what the technologies to produce right water for that, which can go as Dr. David has said as well. It can be used actually in production of food. So the challenges for me is as follows, that environment has to be added as a serious issue in these. So this is one point that I want. The second point, yes, great that we are so great that actually the innovation part is there and so on. But still, I want to see more. For example, IJAD has been open, TRC has been open. I wish that there is actually a question that we give money to these people, okay, to do research and so on. But I want to see cycle economy. This is very important. So what you have done with that, where is your product? Question has to be there. We should be accountable for all of these issues that what you have done, and very important, how is it impacting the economy and developing the environment here in Oman or elsewhere, somewhere else. Actually, if we want to look at this, is a mindset is so important. If we talk about the mindset, we shouldn't start just at the university level. It's an education system, still the education system here in both before university and after university. Both of these should work. If we teach our kids, for example, at schools, be a memorizer, for sure they want to be innovative. Although we have so many innovations, just I'm working from STU, and every time, shortly we see that Oman is winning internationally in innovation. So now what has been action has taken for this innovation to actually be in the market to be used. This is one thing. The second thing is to
let me just stop you there, Professor Bahry, and just go to Dr. Sihan with that. And you kind of mentioned that in your introductory comments, Sihan. You know, we have to actually see things being practically implemented on the ground. let's look at Oman, but also let's look then at perhaps other countries and look at best practice. I mean, again, an argument is always made as, let's not repeat efforts that have been made elsewhere that have been proven successful. So would you say that there is a best practice anywhere else in the Middle East, or where we have seen these sectors, coordinate more and not sort of replicate, if you like, or miss opportunities in terms of collaboration? I mean, does it have to be more action from the top down, governments mandating that these sectors must communicate, or are we seeing best practice of that happening better elsewhere? Oh, were you on mute still?
Sorry.
There we go.
Yeah. I think that actually, of course, the government mandating, but as Professor Stevens says, putting the right policy environment in place to help with the collaboration between the three parties we talked about earlier is very critical. If we take, for example, public-private partnerships, if we don't have the right environment for that, it's not going to work. We see some good examples in general, but if I may, one example that I think actually is a good one, is not necessarily from a certain country, but it's quite general, which is the concept of joint industry project, for example. Joint industry project is where people, even competitors actually, go together to solve a common problem that has a common interest to all. And if you put it in our context, what is more interesting and common interest than actually solving the water, the energy, the food shortages issues? So we have very good examples across many industries that shows that if we have common goal, common interests, even competitors can come together to actually work together and develop good solutions, sustainable and deployable. And this is something that has been done for a long time. There is no, people say you cannot actually be competitor and work together. It's not true. It's been done. Where there is the will, there is the way. As I said, as long as there is common interest, I think the joint industry projects are very good examples where collaboration, having the right partners, as I said at the start, with what is successful about GIPs in general, or at least successful GIPs, is that one, at least, or more of the partners is there, first of all, to inject the real future value parts. For example, if you do something and then after you finish, you find that when you scale it up, it's not economical, that's not good. But if you have the right partner from the beginning, that input is there early on. And the second thing, most of the time, the right partner actually, their role in the GIP is to make sure that if there is a successful, according to the agreed KPIs, key performance indicators, successful outcome, then there is already a plan for deploying this and taking it out to markets. Because if the industrial partner sees profit, there is more interest in more collaboration, more innovation, and then we have a virtuous circle. So I think the GIPs are a very good example when they are done properly.
Right, David, just back to you on that question of sort of commercial viability and those who are going to invest knowing that this is going to be a solution that works and not to be afraid of competitors sort of coordinating. I mean, the whole bankable investment question that enters any of these sort of problems that we're trying to solve. Would you say from your experience that it's obvious now, it's clear that the solutions that such as the ones that Aerofarms has come up with and is using are out there? People are aware that there are very efficient methods of how we can conserve water for food production, etc. How we can, or is the communication on that still weak?
It's the communication's coming, and the what's exciting is there's like parts in the world, as an entrepreneur, you want to see like who are the early adopters, who are the laggers, and you want to go where the early adopters are. And there's a author, Jeffrey Moore, who wrote a book called Crossing the Chasm, and it's where you go from the early adopters to the mainstream, but the innovators want to start with the early adopters. And what's exciting about this region in the Middle East, by the way, is like you look at all the beautiful architecture of buildings. There are people that want to do bold things and do hard things, and that's where the entrepreneur wants to go. An example is like we're building a facility in Abu Dhabi with Audio, which is one of the investment funds of the city of Abu Dhabi. So here they're funding helping to fund a project that is going to really take the technology to another level. So we're always looking, like the hardest project is the first project of a certain type. So we're growing lots of different plants, but when we either try, like this is going to be our 6th generation of technology of a certain type, where it's going to house our first strawberry, like some commercial strawberry activity. Anytime you do like the first ever, it's always the hardest one. And the hard part, the financial systems could be very effective, but the gaps in our financial systems are often in senior debt. Senior debt wants history. So if, for example, I build our first commercial strawberry farm, we don't have 3-year history of that. So then you have to put in equity. And if it's, let's say, a $50 million project, this gets very expensive. So to bridge that, you look for ways where there's public-private partnerships, in so much as there's a good impact for society or for the environment to accelerate these projects. And that's how innovation moves. That's how you have more catalytic progress. But it has to start with that sort of boldness, and the innovators go where there's that willingness to do hard things. The technology is coming in a great way, to answer your question more specifically, and it's coming in an integrated way. So as an example, like our LEDs, we're not innovating on a diode, but we're using a diode because the plant doesn't need every spectrum under the sun. They really need reds and blue spectrums. So the wasteful spectrum is yellow and white. So we strip it out, and then we have a more efficient diode. Same thing, our sensors, our imaging system. Like we partner with Nokia Bell Labs to take what they've developed on imaging and the movement of cameras to apply it to farming. And I could go on and on for a long period of time, but there's a lot of innovation. And I think the world is becoming, in its interconnected ability of finding those solutions that have already been tried and true in other industries and applying them here. If you look at the mobility of a farm, I mean, a lot of it's warehouse conveyance. Like Amazon, others have like nailed that. And how do you apply it to the movement of a plant? And again, there's infinite examples. And now it also, you find the links and the correlations faster. As an example with AI, what we solve, if we want to improve bitterness, pepperiness, sweetness, nutrient density of a plant, what we see and we achieve in leafy greens might be applied to strawberries or something else. And maybe we realized how chemistry moves from looking at some very different examples. So again, the interconnectedness is moving fast. The speed of innovation is moving faster than ever before. And also the understanding of people, it's about not just solving problems, but it's about being a problem solver and pulling it all together. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, David. That's fascinating. Thank you. Professor Stevens, just on that front of, again, back to the question of, these solutions are out there and innovation is moving, as we know, at very fast paces, technology, digitalization. I mean, it's moving faster than we can keep up with it. From the policy point of view, back to you on that in terms of cooperation on that front. I mean, what is it going to take to not talking broadly about the energy transition, but on these solutions and getting, give us an example of how Europe is doing on that front. Do we see more of this industry cooperation? Do we see more of this academia and industry getting together on their own account and using and experimenting with these solutions? What's missing? What's the missing link there?
I think an important point to make here is that if you look at the 3 sectors, food, energy and water, all 3 sectors tend to have very large externalities, external costs and benefits. And it's the function of government to internalize those. And one of the reasons that we've seen a sort of fairly rapid transition in Europe is because governments have been able to do this. But there is a problem here, and the problem is that you have, David made this point, and I think it's very important, is that you need to have very clear objectives for the government. What's it going to do? And the difficulty there is that objectives conflict. So, for example, you might want cheaper water to be able to grow more food. But on the other hand, if you do that, are you going to get more water? You start to distort the market signals. And trying to get that right is not easy and is very difficult. And it's very difficult to look around the world and say, yes, that country managed it. There are very few positive examples out there. There are some, but not that many.
I totally agree. If I could make one point that's sort of relevant of an example that worked. So here, I'll give the example of water contamination. So a lot of freshwater contamination comes from agriculture. And if you follow it back, fertilizers are relatively cheap and people over fertilize. And they're also putting in way too much pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and you have river runoff. The river runoff leads to algae blooms and dead zones. So in San Joaquin, which is a big farmland community in Northern California, they realized that the water and the dead zones, and they traced it back at what it's leading from, and they decided to tax fertilizers and pesticides because there's that externality, as was just discussed, that's not priced in the market. So they're trying to price into the market this externality of this water contamination. And what happened? People were better stewards of fertilizers and pesticides. They didn't over fertilize as much, and it's starting to go down, and the prices are going to remediate the fresh water. So there are examples of how this policy works with commerce to make it happen.
Yes, Dr.
But you have to be
Sihan.
smart about it, like was said.
Again, you're on mute. I'm glad everyone is so disciplined with muting themselves in between. That's good to know.
If only we could remember to unmute ourselves. So one good example actually to help with really driving the innovation related to what David said earlier, that was used in many areas and it works, is blended finance. So what, for example, David was saying about people don't want to put, or investors don't want to put money into something very new. And this is where the government maybe can help, either directly or through its organizations, to actually put part of the finance which will give credibility and give comfort to other investors to come in and fill the gap. And that actually helped in many places around the world to actually do that, either the government or international organizations or donors. When they put that first part, they give comfort to the other more risk-avert investors to come in and say, actually, there is somebody with credibility, with a big weight who put money, but also they put sometimes not really money, but guarantees. And so that side can also be very helpful to just attract other investors and give them comfort to come in and put some of their cash.
Absolutely. Your Excellency.
Could I make a point on that?
Yeah, David, please go ahead. Yeah.
If I can. So, totally agree, and that helps spark innovation. The watch out, if you will, is government wants to support those companies, but not be prescriptive in what the standards are. So as an example, government shouldn't say farming should be through vertical farming because that's prescriptive, or they shouldn't say farming should be through Aerofarms because that's prescriptive. What they should be is performance-based. So government could support a project with Aerofarms. That's good. That helps innovation, or support a project with vertical farming, but should be performance-based and should set the performance targets of, like, farming should use less water, less pollution, less energy, whatever it is. So then we all strive that, whether it's through vertical farming, greenhouse farming, field farming, whatever, that doesn't matter. It's about hitting performance standards, but then support specific companies and specific projects. So we're saying the same thing. I just want to call out that distinction.
No, totally.
Yeah,
it's about
it is about setting targets. Dr. Saif, Your Excellency, Dr. Saif, just to ask you on that front, is the government of Oman doing enough in terms of setting those mandates to industry? You must achieve this much efficiency, you must reach these targets. Is that being felt and trickling down to industry so that then the investors and industry find their solutions? And of course, one way the government can do that is through incentives or taxation. So do you think there needs to be more action on the front from government to mandate industry to get its act together and find the solutions for this?
I think that is going on. It's not really a mandate on the Ministry of Higher Education, Research and Innovation.
Not your ministry, no, but the ministry level.
Of course, at different levels. I am not really knowing details those initiatives, but I am sure there are many partners like the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Water. They are brought together. Actually, they are Ministry of Energy and also there is a Ministry of Trade and Promotion there. But however, from our side, we are really trying to bring at least the innovation level, the different parties. And we do have really many initiatives along that direction. As I mentioned, we have created a strategic water research program, and that program really created several sub-initiatives. We have the Global Water Prize, which is really seek to deliver a handheld, standalone, low-cost desalination device. So this is really a mission-oriented, type of prize, and it's really a sizable price. It's really a $700,000 US price, and it's really promoted through Medric internationally. We have also established several research and innovation awards for water science, and I mentioned also the Sultan Qaboos chair on water using water desalination. We have significantly directed that money towards really utilizing nanotechnology for water desalination. We also have, on the energy sector, we launched a strategic research program on renewable energy. We are bringing together the key players there. And also we have established something like, we call it Oman Eco House competition, which resulted on constructing state-of-the-art 5 houses model in 5 universities. These houses are actually feature utilization of renewable water reuse and energy efficiency. Another platform, of course, is IJAD, which we are bringing together the industry and academia together. IJAD was born actually out of Gulf Intelligence, one of the meetings that in 2015. And now it's really functioning. 50 members, including industry and academia, are there. In terms of food, I mentioned Oman Animal and Plant Genetic Resources Center, but also we are attracting in the Science Park now, OFIC, which is Oman Food Investment Group. They are going to build their food technopark here in Innovation Park Muscat, and we are trying to link them with the ecosystem here of the incubation and the acceleration. As well as, of course, we have the several funding programs. We call it block funding programs to academic institution. But now we are launching actually the National Innovation Digital Platform, which is aiming to convert ideas to startups and linking and connecting the dots between the different players, those who are really have the fund, those who have the services for intellectual property, and those who can do prototyping. So we are really establishing this environment in order to foster and promote these activities. Some of these activities are, bottom-up driven, and some of them actually top-down driven based on a mission-oriented research.
Well, Your Excellency, all those initiatives, we should certainly be getting some progress with that. Oman is doing an incredible job, and as you said, top down and bottom up. It doesn't have to be one way. You mentioned one of the points on enforcing building codes and standards for homes for water energy usage. All those are solutions to getting those sectors working together. We have run out of time, actually. Professor Stevens, I will let you have the last word for a minute, and then we'll have to log off, because I want our panelists here, our speakers, our guests to also be able to log into the final session of the forum at 12 o'clock, which is 3 lunchtime lectures. One is actually by David here, which is on vertical farming. And actually, I was at Expo last week and saw the Dutch pavilion, excellent cone version, I think, of what David, part of what your company is doing. And there will be also a session on digital solutions as well. Professor Stevens, I'll let you have the last word. I'm going to give you 1 minute.
Okay, very briefly. One of the great problems here is trying to get a balance between government intervention and effective market operation. And I just remind you, historically, governments tend to be very bad at picking winners, but losers are rather good at picking governments. And you need to keep those ideas in mind, otherwise you tend to mess up the system.
Okay, well, we'll leave that political point hanging there for everyone's contemplation. Thank you so much to our distinguished speakers for joining us today, and for our listeners who have tuned in. We encourage you to now join the lunchtime lectures, which is the final stretch of the Oman Energy Forum. Look forward to seeing you joining us then, and thank you very much.